Welcome to Bodies in the Post, where I speak to art makers, product creators, scientists, and revolution makers who help us rethink what it is to be human in these post-human times. Here, we get to know the humans behind the creations and their inner worlds that form the basis of what drives them. I'm your host, Lydia Kay, a researcher in this field. Today's episode is with artist, art director, and founder of Anticlone Gallery, Sade English. After studying fashion foundation at the London College of Fashion, where she created designs that aligned with what she referred to as anti-clone, Sade left the course due to feeling restricted by the regimented way fashion is taught. She moved into painting on canvas during the pandemic, following the death of both her parents. We talk about how she managed to channel her grief into painting during this time. This new medium proved very fruitful as Sade sold a painting to the Mandrake Hotel in London after her first exhibition. Following this success, she set up Anticlone Gallery as a place that can support and sell the artworks of other non-traditional artists who have a unique form of expression that doesn't fit the norms of the art world. Sade represents a broader movement happening within the arts, and yet Anticlone is the only gallery of its kind in London. Here, we talk about Sade's artistic background, feeling suffocated at university, being a mixed-race woman in the art world, her ambition to create Anticlone by carving out new ways to create and platform art that challenge the status quo. We also talk about her plans to get back into fashion design. I hope you enjoy listening. Welcome. It's so cool to have you here. We already started talking loads before we hit record, and I kept thinking, oh my God, save it. So please we'll bring up those topics again. But first of all, Sade, you are an artist yourself, which we'll get onto, but you are also founder and artistic director of Anticlone Gallery, which is an independent gallery and platform designed to be, I would say, like an alternative to the usual quote unquote white cube gallery spaces. And on your Anticlone website, you outline that the anti-clone definition is to not conform to suit society. And I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about Anticlone Gallery and like how you set it up and how you came about to realise that there was a gap that you wanted to fill in the art world.
I think the true foundations of the term anticlone itself, it wasn't originally a gallery. It was a concept that I created when I was at uni. So I was studying fashion design pattern cutting, and I kept saying that
at
LCF, yeah.
London College of Fashion, that is, for context.
The dreadful uni that it was. I'm joking. Elements of it were good, but I found it a little bit tedious and stuck in a clone-like way, basically. So I felt that everything just seemed very repetitive, and we're constantly taught about the same way of pattern cutting and design and arts, and it was all very programmed. I didn't feel like I was free at all, and almost as if everybody was being taught almost with a clone-like mindset. So I created Anticlone as just, self-explanatory in itself. But then I recognized that that was basically everything that I represented in terms of myself as a person. I was always very independent and determined to do what I felt was right. And then with that, I put that in my clothing. And then I used that to be the concept for my brand itself, which is Sade English Limited. But then
Sade English Limited is your clothing brand.
Company. Pardon?
That's not your clothing brand. That's
just the brand itself. So that's a visual, that's the foundation. So Anticlone is an umbrella of that. So Sade English Limited is a company, and Anticlone Gallery is something that is extension of that company.
Right.
So as an artist, I then recognized that my work was more wearable art rather than ready-to-wear fashion.
More conceptual.
Yeah, it was more conceptual. It was more avant-garde in wearable art rather than ready-to-wear mass-produced T-shirts, because everything I made was handmade and one-of-one pieces. And again, it was fitting the Anticlone terminology. So I recognized that I'm not the only person who's doing that. There's so many other people. Though I created that terminology, there were so many people who represented that term. And that's when I started to create more visual art. And then I started to photograph other creatives in my clothing. And then it became Sade English, the Anticlone. So that was the concept behind the clothing brand. And then it became the visual and wearable arts brand. And then Anticlone Gallery formed in 2020 because because during, obviously, the pandemic happened, rather than making clothing, I then turned to painting.
Okay, during the pandemic.
Yeah, because I originally always did painting here and there, but my focus was always fashion design. But then I kind of fell out of love with it, I think. To some degree, I just felt the fashion world was very tedious. And though I was in it, I was still very much kind of on the outskirts and not wanting to conform to the stereotypical of what. Then it was still very like women's wear, men's wear, and then there was unisex. And I just didn't even understand why these terminologies were necessary. It's like, respectfully, if it's a dress, it doesn't mean only women can wear this dress. Like, that was 2010. It was still very backwards and quite rigid in terms of how people could express themselves. And then in 2020, a lot of things happened. Like, obviously the pandemic happened, and there was a big change in my life where my parents actually passed in 2019 and 2020, and they were both teachers and photographers. It was cancer, it wasn't COVID related. So for that, I have a very healthy relationship with life and death and rebirth. And for me, when I lost them, because I had known that it was going to happen in 2005, they were diagnosed.
God, at the same time?
No, my mum was diagnosed in 2005. My dad was my stepdad, but I called him dad. And he was much older. He was in his 90s. So he was, but very big age difference between him and my mother. And he was unwell. But then all of a sudden he was diagnosed with cancer quite in a short time frame. And then I think during the pandemic, rather than me wanting to sit behind a sewing machine, it just felt more natural to paint because I found loads of canvases in my mum's room. So then I started to go back to painting again. And then I did an exhibition that was my first solo show in quite a long time. But anyway, I'm going off tangent. In short, Anticlone Gallery was made because when I did that exhibition, I managed to sell my own painting to Mandrake Hotel in Human Street. And me doing that made me realize that I'm curating my own show, I'm painting my own pieces, I'm selling my own work based upon understanding and being able to sell myself. So if I can do that for me, I should do that for other artists who represent what Anticlone means. And then I made Anticlone Gallery. So it was literally because I managed to sell my piece to this art collector that I recognized that rather than conforming to simply being an artist or a designer, I can be a curator, I can be an art dealer, I can be a director of my own platform. And then that's when I made Anticlone Gallery, because I had other artists who I also was really passionate about with their work, and we had a similar mindset, which I would call the Anticlone mindset. And in having that community of people, I then thought, let me platform all of these creatives. And if I can sell their work in the process, why not? So yeah, that's how it kind of developed. It was all very natural. I didn't think I would be here.
Well, you say that's really natural, but I mean, obviously, death is always a really difficult thing to talk about. But I feel like so many people wouldn't have been able to respond to something in such a positive way. And using something like grief and managing to harness your passion and finding it as a drive, like doing it for them in a sense, and being like, I'm going to do this because that's what they would want from me as well. They would want me to be happy and thriving, and like dedicating your gallery to your mother as well, and your mother and your grandmother.
Yeah, so Sade English, my nan was Daphne English, so that's what the company is, Sade English. And Anticlone is a memory of my mum as well. I just think it's really this. I don't want it to in any way sound patronising, because basically I think so many people would have been like, oh my God, I'm just going to wallow. And I think you managed to not only create something out of it and like in their name, but you've also created a platform for like other people to get access to. And I just think that's such an incredible amount of motivation and perseverance through really difficult time in your life. I can't imagine. And it's really impressive, really impressive. What you're doing, I think, is really impressive. And Anticlone, I think, it's basically about supporting unique artists who go against the grain, right? And when you say anti-clone, is it also kind of championing minority groups, people who maybe would find it difficult to get into the art world, who maybe don't have traditional fine art education at university, that kind of thing? I think Anticlone does do that, but that's not my objective. Like for me, I don't want to say that whole, I don't see colour thing, because I hate that terminology. I think it's really problematic. But for me, I am a mixed race woman. My biological dad was Latino, Italian. My mum was Jamaican, born here. I was born in Peckham, and I grew up in pre-gentrified Peckham, not Peckham as it is now. So for me, diversity and community is just something that enabled me to thrive, enabled me to learn and develop within. So I just see people as people. I find my social circle, if we're going to like break it down into like individuals, I've got trans friends, I've got black friends, I've got Asian friends, I've got non-binary friends. My social circle is so diverse, but I don't see it. I don't see them as all of these things. So
No.
though Anticlone, I'm happy, does that, I do feel that, again, even breaking down the categories of people that I represent, I find a little bit odd, because for me, I just see people as people. I don't care what your sexual preference orientation is. If I see your art is something that is necessary and important, and it might not be seen as stereotypically what the arts industry wishes to platform, then I will platform it. Whatever your sexual orientation is or whatever background you're from, it's not relevant to me. But then it might not be relevant to me, but to that artist, maybe that subject is what is pushing their art. So therefore, if I can platform their voices and what is relevant to them and do it in an honest, transparent way, rather than doing it to tick a box, then I'm happy to do that, you know?
But I think that's the key thing you just touched on there when you said it doesn't feel relevant or like important to you, in that it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be a topic. It shouldn't be a thing. But the whole point and the whole reason, I guess, of you feeling this need to do Anticlone Gallery is because it is such an issue in the external world and in normative society where lots of people are discriminated against and excluded. Like, yes, not making it a thing for you and like in your gallery, I think is actually really important, because it's not about that. But at the same time, it's worth mentioning because it's definitely. It feels it's the only gallery doing what you're doing. And the art world and gallery world is so elitist, and like obviously it's known, it's like a cliche, isn't it, how elitist it is, upper middle or upper class, white and mostly male. I think that's changing, but I still think it's very small amounts of change.
Definitely. I think, though I am the director of Anticlone Gallery, I also manage, as a gallery duty manager, another gallery. I won't mention names, but even within that, I'm the only Black Latino woman within it. I just find that when I entered, I wasn't shocked, but I still am internally somewhat shocked.
Or disappointed,
I think it's disappointing, but I feel that rather than enabling that disappointment to like fool you and then just make you feel like, oh, I don't even want to be in this, I'd rather be that person to make that change so that like young versions of me or younger people can recognize that they can see themselves within me having that role.
Yeah.
As much as it is changing, it's so slow, like so beyond. Slow. And above all, I think, I don't know necessarily if it's change or if it's just simply performative change.
I feel see like what you mean.
Do you know what I mean? Like
100%.
I don't believe that things are changing to set a new pathway with the arts world. I think it's performative because
you feel like it's a trend.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like a culture, and especially Black culture, talking from obviously my personal existence, Black culture is definitely something that is seen as a trend within the arts, within fashion, within society, full stop. So I feel that even if I see Black representation in companies, I'm always so happy to see it, and I want that to be a consistent thing. But I also do then question, I wonder what the management looks like, I wonder what HR looks like, because it's
who's
all
in the
good
boardrooms.
like it's all good to have people front facing to the public to say, look, there's someone who's diverse, they're trans, they're black and brown, they're POC, like all of these terminologies even. And now you have, let's put your pronouns on. It's like, I'm a bit on the fence with that, because I think it's really good and necessary that people respect people's pronouns, but then we're human. For me, that's the foundation. But if people feel that being called something and it being public knowledge is necessary for their existence, then cool. But I do feel that a lot of people are doing so just to appear to the public that they are making progress and change versus doing it naturally and systemically.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one, isn't it? Because obviously I see a lot of cisgendered people are putting their pronouns on everything. And I think that in their head, they're kind of seeing it as like, we should all do it for support. But at the same time, I personally haven't done it myself because I feel a bit like I want to make sure it is actually helpful before I do that.
But with me, I don't refer to people via pronouns. For me,
do you not?
I'll just say, what's your name? And then, or I say they. But again, I've grown up, like my entire community of friendship circles is, I always say, like 99.9% queer. So like I've got best friends who are trans since I was like 10. So for me, this is not, within the industry, within the media, it seems as if this is all new.
And it's not new.
This is like, humanity has existed. This has always existed, you know? So for me, like when I see, what's your pronouns? I think it's really, I respect and I commend people who do that, because I think it's important, because you should never assume anybody's pronouns.
I think it's about misgendering people, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think they can be very offended by that, and quite rightly.
Yeah, I know people make mistakes and things happen, but I'm just like, one, you shouldn't assume regardless. Like, for me, just say they or ask what someone's name is. That way, like, why you have to refer to somebody based upon what you think their gender is like, why does that even matter? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But again, I have some friends who are non-binary and trans who really do find it important that you use the right pronouns. So for that reason, I think it's a positive thing, full stop. I think what it is, within my community, we all accept one another, full stop. But unfortunately, I think especially as you get older, that naivety is removed and you recognise that sadly, your community is like 2% out of 100. So it's like, as much as we accept one another, regardless of what our gender, our background, our social status are, you know, our classism, like those things are not relevant. Like all of my friends, we all love one another regardless. We just love one another based upon who we are as people.
And that's not the focal point.
Yeah, but unfortunately society isn't like that, which is why things like pronouns are really necessary. I think as much as I'm like, oh, why? I'm like that because my friends
For you,
and my...
it's not a big deal
it's
at
not,
all.
It's not a thing.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. The rest of society is like behind.
Yeah, so behind. And I think regardless of even as I get older, we see change and then we see an undoing. And a lot of the time there's something that's present in the media where they focus on one thing to like cloud the public's mindset or awareness as to what they're then undoing, like trans laws, and they're undoing that behind closed doors that happened during COVID. People not actually having the rights to now protest, like all of these things were laws that were being unbroken and like completely changed so that we don't have rights, but instead they were focusing on like there be no eggs, like, you know, like it's so random, but like in the news they'll be focusing on things that are so not life-changing. It's distractions.
It's
and
treating
then
us a bit like toddlers, like look
at this. You know, like, oh, look at this whilst I'm taking away your toys.
Your rights,
100%.
If you're enjoying this episode, please subscribe or press the follow button to get the new episodes. And take a second to like, rate and review the podcast because it helps other people find it. You could also share this episode with someone who you think would enjoy it. So going back to that time during the pandemic and you started returning to like canvases and paint, you got a bit sick of the fashion industry and like your time at university. Can you tell us a little bit more about, was that quite a big thing?
I only realised now though, which is quite interesting, at the time, I found it really frustrating because I was fortunate where my mother was a teacher and she was always encouraging me to learn about everything and anything I was intrigued by. So I did dressmaking classes the moment I could probably use my hands. So I could sew, I did pattern cutting beforehand. So once I was in uni, I found that they were teaching me things I had learned when I was a child. So I was just finding it extremely slow and frustrating. And I had my own way of draping and they were telling me it wasn't the right way. And it was like, I just found it just so controlling and not progressive for me mentally. I just found that I was just being still.
You mentioned to me earlier that you decided not to complete the BA. You got frustrated. That must have been a big decision. But was that, I mean, obviously the right decision? And
100%. It was only ever MAs and BAs that were put in the press day show. But the director saw my work and said, I'm actually going to change it this year. And they wanted my work featured.
So it was not a BA you were doing then?
It's a BA, but it's like a 2-year foundation, then you do a top-up year.
Oh, okay. So you were it was foundation bit first.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I did the 2 years, but you're only meant to be in the press day show if you're doing a BA or an MA.
Okay.
But he saw my work and said, I want your work in it. So though I felt encouraged by that because that had never happened before, my tutor, I won't name names, but she and I didn't go on because I would always go 4 steps ahead and she would get frustrated because then everybody else is like watching me rather than watching her. And I wasn't do it to be that, you know, I know everything person. It was just, I'm not going to just slow down.
Speedy.
I know what I'm doing. So I just wanted to have help perfecting my technique of draping rather than doing it her method, which her method is right, but there's so many different ways you can drape a garment. It doesn't have to be
doesn't have to be her way.
Doesn't have to be her way. And so I just kept feeling really frustrated. And when he recognized my work and said, I actually like it, let's put it in the press day show. So I was featured and that was my first insight into industry experience because that's where all of the press, and I had like my first fashion PR representation then, and I was featured in like Vogue, and this was all like second year. So it was quite
That's amazing.
early. And then
when you say they were conceptual pieces, like, can you kind of describe them
it was
to
called
us?
Daphne. It was the name of my late nan. The pieces were black and texturized, so my pieces weren't women's wear, men's wear. I just said it's for everyone. So I had 2 models and I basically stylized them in a way of Anticlone in my mind. And everything was oversized, and the stereotypically a dress in them days was like for women, right? But I didn't have any of that.
So you mean in terms of when you do a degree in fashion, often it's menswear, women's wear,
Yeah.
and occasionally, hopefully now, sometimes people will say unisex, but still that feels
But
like
that
you've got 3
terminology was
options.
still used.
Yeah.
I don't know if it is now, but I know.
think often they say gender neutral now, but they do still put in menswear and women's wear. I think.
Yeah, and for me, I wasn't doing that. I just made clothes, and whoever wanted to
bodies,
wear it
yeah.
could wear it. Like, it didn't matter what gender they were. I just found that abnormal. But I guess that was like my first taste into industry, and I recognized that I can talk about my work best. I know aesthetically how I want things to look. I kind of had already created a brand identity in my mind of how I wanted things to be, and we had to do the top-up year to make it the BA. And I remember I did do a portfolio to go into it, and the tutor who looked at my work said that my inspiration might cause offence because it was based upon looking at what society sees as ugly and what fashion industry at the time wasn't platforming. So I've got like 4 disabled cousins, and disabilities then weren't even on the runway, let alone black models. It was just predominantly white women, and then it was like size 0. So now in 2023, obviously it's more diverse and it's more inclusive of everyone, but then it just wasn't. And I was looking at deformities and disabilities and then creating different structures of garments. So rather than it being a stereotypical feminine silhouette, I was making deformed sort of sculptured sleeves on garments and creating it more 3D and textured, and things that society saw as ugly, I was making, in my opinion, it looked beautiful. And they just thought that it might cause issues, and I was just having a back and forth.
Because they thought it might cause issues because they thought you were being inspired by disability.
Yeah.
And they saw that as a problem.
Yeah.
Wow, that is really problematic.
Yeah.
Maybe were they trying to say, like, because you're able-bodied?
They didn't
ruling it out as... But the thing is, then disabled people are totally excluded, aren't they? Because
Exactly.
there's no representation, and they're not there to give themselves representation often. That's really... So they were like, you can't do that.
Yeah. And I was just like, but why? Like,
That's really shocking.
well, the thing is, when I talk to my friends about it, they're not shocked because so many people had stories like that. It's just no one really shared it. But I was there looking at this guy like, I'm not... like
You were championing it.
Yeah.
You were, like, celebrating
Exactly.
it. Yeah.
And it was so clear in my portfolio that's what I was doing. And I don't have to do the whole, I've got disabled families for me to like prove a point either. Like, I don't... It's like when people say I'm not racist, I've got a black friend. Like, I'm not here to list it, but I'm just looking
I've got
at
black friends, I've got gay friends.
You know?
Yeah.
So I was just like really confused by his response. And again, it was a white man telling me that my way of creating is not the right way. And I was just fed up of it. The fashion world then, when I was a student, was predominantly everyone who was lecturing or leading or telling me what was right and wrong was someone who didn't look like me. And I just felt fed up. The director at the time, I think his name was Rob Phillips or John Phillips. Sorry if I've quoted your name wrong. I told him what happened and I showed him my work, and they were like, look, if you want to do this solo, don't you? And I didn't even say it. I was like, yeah, I'm thinking it. And he said to me, like, just so you know, it's going to be, he was always very honest with me. He was like, it's going to be fucking hard. Like, it's not easy. But if you want to do it, go for it. I think you've got the drive, but it's not going to be easy.
And by that, he meant go off and have a career in fashion without finishing the degree.
Yeah. And I said, I just don't know if I can do this anymore. Like, I'm constantly fighting a battle of being told, okay, so this is how you have to do a portfolio, 10 initial ideas, 12 development designs. But like, I don't create like that. I get fabric and I put it on a mannequin and I make the piece there and then. I don't have an initial idea of the design. I'm inspired by my surroundings. So I could look at a painting and then make a garment from it. I don't sit there drawing 12 different ideas. Like, even that is so programmed on how I was meant to create something. And I just don't work that way. So I was having to do these hundreds and hundreds of drawings just for them to approve me.
To tick a box.
To tick a box. And I just didn't make sense to me. So at that point, I was like, I'm not going to redo a portfolio to make you feel comfortable so that you can give me a certificate to state that I can be a designer. Like, don't need to do this. So I left.
Yeah, that's so... I mean, it's really brave. How did your family take it at the time?
My mum was fuming. She's a teacher, so she was like, what are you doing? Especially growing up in Peckham, like, one, working in the arts is not seen as an actual job at the time. Like,
seen as too risky.
Not even at the time, full stop, period. Like, as a black child, they want you within our culture where you do something academic, something that's safe, something that will ensure a well-paid job. The arts is just seen as a hobby. Like, it's not taken seriously. But fortunately, my mum went to Canberra College of Art, so she understood my reasonings.
What did she study there?
She did graphics. She did she worked on ID. So she did like an issue in
ID
the
magazine.
80s. Yeah, ID magazine. So she had experienced the arts world and she thrived in it. She did well. But then she had me at 25 and thought, maybe I need to get a job that's a little bit more well paid. And then she ended up becoming a teacher in IT. So she still did creative things and she taught me how to build Anticlone in terms of the website. She taught me how to make computers even. So all of the web design and stuff I learned from my mum. So the graphics, all of that I got from my mum. She understood my reasonings for wanting to work within the arts because in all honesty, she's the one who introduced me to it. So with that in mind, when I told her that I was going to art school, she was like, as long as you get your, the right A levels, you pass the GCSEs, like do what you want, but I would prefer you to be a teacher. But she didn't.
Oh, that's what she wanted, for you to be a teacher.
She didn't want me to be a teacher, but she was worried about the financial stability. I guess when you're coming from second generation Jamaican background, though she was born here, like she was one of 10, so she saw my grandparents really have to struggle to make ends meet. They were always working, so financially they were okay. But for my mum, she just wanted me to have a stable life, and working in the arts isn't seen as so stable. It's hard.
Yeah,
Let's be honest. It's not easy. Even
you can see why parents put that pressure on.
100%.
I get it. I think sometimes it's obviously always coming from a good place.
Yeah.
But sometimes it can be quite smothering for some people. And some people don't end up going into it like you did, which I think is good.
But that's the thing. I was lucky where my mum still encouraged it as long as I got a degree out of it. So when I told her I was not going to do the BA, she was just like, for fuck's sake. Like, I can't. The thing is, I'm not someone who can be controlled. I will respect my elders and I respected my mum. And I still do live, even though she's not physically here, I know what things she would prefer me to do and I still take on board her wishes were for me. But I just couldn't be controlled that way anymore. It was just frustrating. And I'm paying you to control me. At uni, as much as you might not see the money come out of your account, you're paying these people to tell you how to exist as a creative. And for me, when I think of the arts, I think of expression and freedom and being able to express yourself transparently without judgment. But the moment I went to LCF, I recognized that's not what the arts industry is at all. It is still about conforming. It's still about being controlled. It's just, you look at galleries and you think, this beautiful painting. You see all of these beautiful things, but even then, artists have been taught how to paint, which paintbrush to use. You don't know that if you're just looking at something. You just think it's a beautiful thing. So the moment I went into LCF and then I told my mum I wasn't doing the degree, she wasn't happy about it, but she just said, as long as you get a job and you pay for your own way, then fine. I don't think any parent would be happy if their child decides to drop out of uni.
Yeah, just because it's so expensive as well. But looking back now, when you see that experience and how much it taught you, do you feel do you look back and think that was actually a really good thing? That was a good experience because it taught me what I want and what I don't want in life.
I feel that in life, everything is a lesson, right? So I don't regret going to uni. If I hadn't have gone, I wouldn't have made Anticlone, probably. Maybe I would have in some way, but having felt the pressure to conform to their way of being a creative is what made me make Anticlone. So I appreciate it for all of the lessons learned, for sure. I don't regret it, and I am glad that I went. But I also do feel like I would have preferred if I didn't have to pay and that it maybe was 1 year rather than 2 years, because I do feel like a year in, I recognised that I felt like I was wasting time there. But I'm grateful for everything because at the end of the day, it's made me who I am. Recognising it made me create the company in terms of almost rebelling to...
Made you see the problem that you want to push against.
Yeah, so I'm grateful for that. I just, it was an expensive lesson
to learn, yeah. Do you still sew and make clothes or wearable art?
I haven't for a while. What's quite interesting is in 2020 February, I went to Marrakesh to get some fabric to make a new collection.
Oh my God, just before everything got shut down.
For me, it was 2020 was weird because my mum passed February 2020, and I didn't know about the pandemic because I was in hospital every single day with her until she passed. So all of my friends and family, and I don't have a TV. My mum, I wasn't a kid who was raised with television. She didn't have it in my house. So like, though I obviously would read the news, I was so focused on my mum that I didn't even know that there was something called COVID happening. It was only when she passed, when I came out of hospital, my friends were like, so I know this is a bit crap what's happened, but there's also
something
else is happening.
Yeah.
And it was just mad because my mum's funeral was even the first day of lockdown.
It must have felt so, I mean, it was surreal anyway, but dealing with grief and the death of your mum at the same time, I bet you were sort of slightly desensitized from the pandemic.
If I'm honest, I was not slightly. I was 100% desensitized. Like, I empathize with anyone who lost people during that time, of course. But for me, I had no emotional, true awareness of what was happening because I was just so focused on surviving.
Getting through the day.
Yeah, getting through the day, basically. So for me, it was like losing my dad, then having to recognize I was then going to lose my mum, and then coming out of hospital, and then the whole world's on lockdown. I was just like, what the fuck is going on? It was, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Swear away.
It was just like, I was so... I remember when my friend told me we were in the car going home and I burst out laughing. And my friends were just worried because they were like, she hasn't... What's going on? Like, I'm laughing.
Where were you living at that point as well?
Greenwich.
Okay, but were you living like with people so you could...
Oh, no, it was just my mum and I. I lived with my mum. I moved out like twice in my life and I moved back in because I just didn't like living with other people. I didn't like paying rent.
Yeah, that's probably it.
Yeah.
I didn't like paying rent. That's even more difficult, isn't it? Because you'd gone from living with your mum to then your mum passing away to then going into lockdown and living without your mum.
Yeah.
And then living alone. Like,
yeah, but the thing is, two of my best mates, bless them, they were in the bloody room when she went. Sorry, guys. But
they were in the room when she died.
Yeah.
Oh, that is true friendship, isn't it?
Well, I was in the room every single day with her, so I knew, I won't go too in depth because I don't know who's listening in case they're experiencing any potential loss, but I knew what the processes were of somebody dying because I knew someone's been diagnosed with terminal health condition, and I asked for the details, like very graphic details as to the processes of when they start to come to their end. So I knew that morning that it was likely she was going to go because her breathing had changed. So I wanted my friends to be out of the room that day. I remember it was like she passed 9:05. So I was like, 7, I want everyone to leave. She's like, her breathing's getting lower and lower. And then my friends were in the room because they were chilling with me. But I wanted to be alone. I didn't want people to be there. But I was really fortunate that they handled it okay, bless them. And then they kind of all moved in with me. So I didn't actually live alone.
That's amazing.
Like, they stayed with me for a while. But I'm a single child, though I love my sister. Hi. She found... 2020 was mad. Like, I met my sister...
Hang on, so you're not an only child?
No, I am an only child from my mum and biological dad. But my biological dad has 10 kids.
Oh, okay, so you've got loads of half-siblings.
Yeah, but I don't know any of them apart from one. And she found me 4 months after my mum passed away. So 2020 was just wild, full stop.
Oh my God.
It was crazy.
That's amazing.
But luckily, like, she's incredible and it was really beautiful for her to have found me. And we've got so many mutual friends. It's unreal.
No way.
Which is even more bizarre. Like, one of my best friends knows her.
That
and
is
it's,
so
like,
weird.
she's a dancer. Like,
well, that feels a bit like, obviously not to get woo-woo, but it feels a bit like fate, doesn't it, in a sense?
No, definitely.
She came into your life at a point when you needed family.
Yeah, no. It was surreal, but it was a really beautiful experience, especially to have her. And then 2 cousins found me. It was mad. I was very cautious though of everything because being a single child living with my mum and then my life kind of changing overnight. Like, though I, prepared for it, you can never really prepare for that.
No.
Yeah, I just had to survive. There was no choice.
And that's when you started painting?
Yeah, because, So I had gone to Marrakesh to get fabric to make a new collection, clothing. But then when I arrived back 2 weeks later, my mum passed away. And at that point, whenever I sew, I have to want to sew. Like, as much as I love fashion design and creating pieces, if I'm honest, if I'm not in the right headspace, I can't sew. Otherwise, the fabric, that's worth a lot of money. Like, I invest a lot into sourcing fabric. So the fabric is not cheap at all. So I can't go on a sewing machine if I'm not in the right mindset. So when my mum passed, till now, all of that fabric for that collection is in a box. I just didn't touch it. But because I then decorated the whole house, changed everything because my mum's aesthetic was like fucking awful. And so I needed like a project.
Sorry to your mum.
Sorry, mum, love you. But yeah, her aesthetic was just not mine. I'm very monochrome. My whole house looks like it's just black and white and it's just clean. I need like a blank canvas in order to like exist and work in. If it's too busy, I just can't really create. It irritates me. So just something clean enables me to think in a more calm manner. I was removing things, giving things to charity, cancer research, whatnot. I found the canvases and then I felt obviously a lot of emotion that I was probably internalizing. And then one day I just decided to use one of her canvases because she actually put a stick note on it and she said paint Sade and then just like a kiss. And I was like, what the fuck? She's so creepy. So then I thought,
was she planning to use that canvas to paint a picture of you then?
No, that stick note was telling me to paint. So I have a picture that she made of me, already. But
so that was a blank canvas then?
It was blank canvas. Okay. She just put paint Sade X, as in I should paint. Oh. So I felt like she knew that I would need something.
That's really
sweet. At least I like
sweet.
to think that's the case. I
that's
don't know.
Really sweet.
But basically, with those canvases, I painted all of the emotion I was feeling. And that's why with that exhibition, it was called The Immortal Diaspora, because I felt like my ancestors and my mum live on through me. So that was the title of the exhibition and all of those paintings. And then that painting I sold to Mandrake, and then that's how Anticlone Gallery came about. But I am going to make a collection again. Everyone keeps asking. But
so that's kind of been, you mean you're going to make a collection, fashion collection?
Clothing collection,
right, okay,
yeah.
You do want to.
Yeah.
I was about to say, hasn't that been sort of shelved a bit because you've gone on to painting and to Anticlone Gallery? So your focus is being swamped by that.
Yeah. I'm just a different person now. And clothing and expression is still something that I embody. For me, my paintings are all abstract expressionism. It's not, still life. I just paint how I feel. I don't paint every single day. I'm not one of those artists who sits in my studio and puts on some jazz and like starts painting. I'm not that person. It's if I feel something and I need to release it healthily, in a healthy way, I'll put it on a canvas or go to the gym. But painting is what came natural to me when I lost my parents, because I just needed to let everything out quickly. Mm-hmm. And when you're making clothing, you've still got rules. You've got to 5 centimetre seam allowance, all of these things. Like you have to be rigid in creating
within
the final.
creativity.
Within it. Whereas with a painting, I can do what I want. Like there are no rules. So since 2020 till now, I've only been focused on painting and Anticlone Gallery because overnight Anticlone Gallery became this thing that I'm so passionate about that I put all of my focus into it. But in the same breath, I do feel that when I'm now wearing clothing or looking at fashion, I'm so bored. I've been fortunate where there's a lot of really great designers that I will invest into, like Hood by Air or Helia or Alex Studio. There are still cool brands that I really like, but I'm still finding it a little bit limiting and a little bit boring, the clothing that I'm then purchasing, because I'm so used to wearing my own stuff that I think I've been so focused on just painting that expressing myself through clothing. I'm more minimal now. Like back then I was more like almost making a point, like wearing things that were extremely oversized or more wearable art because I felt that fashion was boring and tedious. Therefore, I wanted to be the opposite of that. But I feel like as I'm getting older, I'm not going to wear, a 4-meter leatherette train jacket that I made.
Why not?
Don't get me wrong, I've got friends who do and they look amazing doing it, but it's just not practical for me now. So
yeah, that's the thing with fashion. I would love to just go all out all the time, but I find more and more that I'm like, I've got loads of shit to do. I need to have comfy shoes on. It's really lame, but it's like there's so much that I don't wear in my wardrobe. I've got so many lovely clothes that I've my clothes are like my treasures. They're the things that for me are the most valuable, even though I don't spend tons of money on like a piece. But for me, that's what I love dressing up. But so many of my clothes now I don't really wear because I'm like, well, the commute's gonna take an hour. I don't want to sweat into that dress and have sweat patches.
But for real, that's the reality.
I've got these boots that I absolutely love that I spent quite a bit of money on and I barely ever wear because they're so uncomfortable. And I'm like, this is just so lame. I'm so old.
No, but I hear you. But I think this is, I feel like I've become that person. I completely relate. Though when I'm going out with my friends, I will still express myself more so in terms of wearing more avant-garde pieces. Like my style versus now it's 13 years ago versus now has changed. change. Like I still have elements of avant-garde, but then I also explore like the streetwear style element, which is probably like from my foundations and Packham. But then I'm always usually in like a suit or tailoring. So I love what the fashion would see as masculine silhouettes.
Like androgynous.
Androgynous. Like that's always been my look.
Tailored, like tailored blazers and shoulder pads.
Yeah. It's like a cross between that and streetwear. It's like a mixture. So the reason why I want to make a clothing collection again is because I'm really starting to get frustrated by what's out. Everything is extremely overpriced and I know how things are made. I would invest in like leather goods. So I buy bags, certain designers when it comes to leather goods, like especially like Bottega Veneta, they're main bags that I'll buy because I know how it's made. I know that that's not something I can replicate. So I will invest into that versus clothing. I know how to make clothing. So I find it a little bit harder to purchase
stuff where you're like, I could make this.
I can make it. And I feel like that's starting to come in my mind more and more. And that's why I've now got the itch to make a collection because I don't want to buy the shit that I'm seeing on the rails. So I will make a collection. I'm actually going back to Marrakesh this month. So it's the first time I've gone back. It'll be a 3 anniversary since my mum's passed. And it's the first time I'm going back since she's passed. And I'm actually going to get fabrics to make the collection. I want it to be pieces that I can wear daily because the pieces I was making previously that went under Sade English Limited, those aren't pieces that me as a 31-year-old woman can wear every single day. Like I'm very realistic. I love outerwear, so I will have outerwear pieces that are more, let's say, avant-garde, not necessarily day-to-day pieces, but because it's outerwear, you can take it off very easily, you can put it on. But I'm talking like the underlayers. I want it to be things that are more wearable for me.
More functional, yeah.
More functional, yeah. Which is funny.
Well, that's really exciting. Please keep us up to date with when you're going to do your collection. Where do you think you'll show it?
I don't care for Fashion Week, so I wouldn't do it in that. I would probably do something very independent. I would create it. I'll do it in more of like an exhibiting way. I'm connected to Lab Store London, which is a lifestyle avant-garde boutique on Newman Street. And I've got Anticlone art pieces there currently. So if people see things online, the Anticlone Gallery website, you can actually purchase some of the sculptures from there. And they have brands that are more similar in terms of maybe ethos and stylized like Rick Owens, Hyder Ackerman. So I would probably have the clothing stock there. I haven't told Ray that, but that's what I'll be doing.
Now they know.
I would probably have it in a store like that. So it would be amongst more like-minded designers in that sense.
Yeah. Is your focus at the moment on building Anticlone?
Yeah.
So are you at the moment kind of finding new artists to show their works through Anticlone? And
fortunately, if I come across an artist, then I will approach them. But fortunately, everything has been quite natural. People are sending me their submissions. I am also on the lookout. So if I see something I like, I'm not shy to ask. But for me, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. And I feel like I get a lot of submissions, and art, of course, is art regardless. But I have a very sort of signature to Anticlone visually and like the ethos behind it. Therefore,
it has to fit.
It has to fit. And also Anticlone is a memory of my mum, so I'm not going to jump on something just because it's popular.
No, it has
needs
to be the right
be
fit.
true to what Anticlone means.
Yeah.
So I am looking for artists. I want people to submit their work to me. If they feel that their work doesn't conform to the old ways of the arts world, then definitely send it over.
So you often will have like events, Anticlone events, where you'll showcase artwork and artists' work. And you've had one in Stoke Newington at, what was that place called?
Oh, Newington Green.
Newington Green.
Yeah, and Newington Green Meeting House. Yeah.
Meeting House, that's it. Which is like an old church. So there was really iconic work there in a beautiful building.
That was wild. That was like the first like building takeover I've had.
Was it?
Yeah.
It was really cool.
Thank you.
It was really cool. I loved the sculptures. They were my favourite part. And the performance.
Yeah.
Of course. That was
Parma.
epic. Absolutely epic. But yeah, in terms of like what's coming up for Anticlone, what do you see for like the future of Anticlone? And do you want to have a permanent space for the gallery?
I've had a lot of people have been asking me that. I think in terms of permanent, I'm thinking about that. For me, Anticlone Gallery has always been something that would exist online, but I want there to be physical exhibitions that can be all over the world. I do eventually want there to be a permanent space, but I want there to be multiple permanent spaces. I don't believe that London is the only place for Anticlone. I want to actually take it more worldwide. And in countries where I'm from, like places like Jamaica, places like countries in Africa, Nigeria would be great. Berlin. I like that it's an online platform that can be nomad in spirit and also be physically in all different areas so that it's accessible to all. I think a permanent space in London makes sense because I'm from here. This is my hometown and I'm proud to be from London. But I want Anticlone to be accessible because I do feel like, as I said, the arts industry isn't so inclusive. It's quite elite. And I want all different communities to be able to access it. But having access to buildings like Newington Green Meeting House that is in somewhere that is still gentrified, but the community is still more diverse, and being able to bring it there rather than having a Mayfair Anticlone Gallery space. Don't get me wrong. If I am looking at the moment to get funding because everything I do with Anticlone is self-funded. I don't think many people know that. I think people assume that because it's been in places like Soho House or Soho Square or Newington Green that I've got this, someone funding it all, but it's all personally funded by myself. So I am looking for funding this year so that I can have more pop-ups that I'm not having to fund myself. Mm-hmm. Luckily, I've had National Lottery funding with Newington Green, but I need to try to have more funds to enable it to be present in different areas. A permanent space would be great, but it's not my sole focus. Right now, the focus is to get funding so that I can do more physical pop-ups worldwide. Mm-hmm. That's my goal. What was the other question? Sorry. Oh, what's the plan? Oh, yeah.
Well, that sounds like the plan. That sounds incredible.
That's mainly the plan. I'm working
to make it like international.
Yeah, and to also develop it further because it is online, it enables me to have like an archive of where everything is. So having more moving image like videos. I've got something called Anticlone Conversation, which I do with every pop-up, where I basically moderate a panel and I invite now guest curators or creatives to lead panels, and then that will be filmed. And I'm actually now going to take the sound so that I can have anti-podcasts, which I'm now making, which is the Anti-Podcast. And then I will have talks that will be all on the platform. So it's about diversifying the website so that it's not just go to the shop to buy art. It also has interviews and films and podcasts and just to elevate it further.
And what made you want to set up the podcast? Because we were talking about that earlier, like what inspired us to do it?
It was because I'm always I'm so blessed to have such an incredible group of friends around me. But I hate that terminology cliquey, but we can be a bit to ourselves and have these really important discussions that I just feel need to be accessible to more people. So the first panel that I did for Anticlone Takeover, like a pop-up, was at White City Soho House. We didn't record that one, which was a shame. But the most recent ones that I've done, so the second and the third at the Anticlone Takeover 2 at Newington Green, they are recorded. So those films will be on the website. It will be on Anticlone Gallery.
Yeah.
And I've also started the first episode of the podcast, the Anti-Podcast, with someone who was on that panel, Shingi Rice, who's a photographer. The main reason behind it was whenever I would do paneled conversations, I recognise that only the people in that room get to have access to all of this information. And
you don't want it to be exclusive.
I don't want it to be exclusive at any point, which is why all of my exhibitions are always free, which is why any workshops that I do are always free. For me, I always think about the Sade kid version of myself growing up in Peckham, where I was fortunate enough to have my mother who would take me to all of these art galleries. So I never once felt that these spaces weren't for me because it was just natural for me to explore these spaces. But I do feel like once you start to make things, £10, £20, and then excluding a whole community who might not have that disposable income. And
it's tricky, of course, because you want to be inclusive, but at the same time, it must be really difficult to fund. Because if you're committing to it being free, which is an amazing thing to commit to, then it's really tricky because it means you've got a real issue with funding often. That's why
there is. That's why a lot of projects end up coming to an end because you can't do it forever. I'm not gonna lie, even I've had that question, how long can I do this for? And everyone's like, what? I'm like, because I'm very fortunate where I have disposable income that I can put it into Anticlone. But if I'm not making consistent sales from art, if I'm not doing things like this, and it's just constant cash flow issue. But I'm fortunate where at the moment I can continue to do it, and I don't intend for it to ever end, which is why I'm now looking for additional funding. But in order for Anticlone to continue elevating the way it is, it just needs to be across all platforms. And I think it can always be free because I'm always going to have the option to donate. So hopefully with good human deeds, there will be donations that will come through that can help fund it.
And those that can afford it will. Yeah.
I feel like it shouldn't be by force. I think if you can, afford to donate something, do. If you can't, it's important that it's accessible for everyone. I don't really want that to ever change unless it's in a certain space. Like for instance, when I did the Soho House workshop, it's not free.
What did, of course.
Not that I got money for that because Soho House actually charged the members, which was interesting.
Charged the members
to do the workshop.
So they paid you. They paid you.
I was given a budget, yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm a member as well, but I was still paid, so thank you. I'm not coming for you.
But what does that workshop involve? What do you mean by workshops? What kind of thing?
It was a drawing workshop. So I had one of the artists come down and basically show a few of the members how they do their drawing techniques. That was Conrad Armstrong.
Okay, that's really cool.
So for instance, things like that, it depends where I am. Like I am now having to obviously look at it for longevity. Like I'm not doing this for a hobby, right? So when I do more workshops going forward, for instance, if I'm doing it in a members club or if I'm doing it in a space where there's disposable income running through the ground, I'm not going to make it free because these spaces are catered towards 100%. A target market who can afford to. Versus if I'm going to do a community project in Brixton, not the gentrified part, I'm talking where the communities are completely forgotten, I would not make that workshop paid. I would make it free because I know who the market is in that space, and community is important to me because I come from that.
And I guess like being really savvy about doing things in places where you can make money and can charge people, and using that money to continue doing stuff for free, which is what you're really passionate about.
Yeah,
it's amazing. I'm so excited for your podcast, and also I'm really excited for your new fashion collection.
Yeah, don't quote me on it there.
Watch this space.
I don't know when it's going to come out.
I want to see your... I kept thinking actually as well, you know, and you said you've got it, that fabric in a box and you haven't opened it. And there's a part of me that wonders, like, maybe you're not opening that box because it will remind you of a time when you went to Marrakesh before your mum passed, before the pandemic, before a whole lot of stuff hit the fan for you. So maybe that is kind of something like an artifact from the past that you kind of don't want to go there. And part of me is like, open the box, get out the fabric.
I think you're probably right, 100%.
Because it's hard. Certain things will just remind you and take you right back.
Yeah.
Maybe that's also stopping you from wanting to sew.
Could be.
That box is being a blocker.
Wow, I've just got some free therapy there.
You know where to come. You know where to come. But thank you so much for coming on Bodies in the Post. It's been really great to talk to you. And I love what you're doing with Anticlone. It's so exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can't wait to see more of what you do.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Bodies in the Post with Sade English. If you enjoyed listening, please follow the show for more episodes.